guys, I'm Aaron from PhoneDog.com, and if you're a T-Mobile customer, you have quite a few high-end smartphones to choose from. You have the HD7, the myTouch 4G, the G2, the Vibrant, and a couple other devices that are coming by the end of the year, into next year, like the Venue Pro from Dell, and more. So you walk into the store and you think, should I get this one? Should I get that one? Should I wait? Which one's best? Which one's worse? Well, over here in PhoneDog land, we do something pretty cool that I like to call a dogfight. It's the HD7 versus the myTouch 4G, Windows Phone 7 versus Android. Huge big display versus not so huge but still cool display. 5 megapixel camera versus 5 megapixel camera. You get the idea. But it's a dogfight between these two devices. Special thanks to our friends at Best Buy Mobile for hooking us up with not one, not two, but 4 of these devices, 2 HD7s, 2 myTouch 4Gs for use in our One Paw Bandit giveaway. One thing I like about Best Buy Mobile, you don't have to mess with rebates. You walk in, you walk out, you pay the after rebate price, and you don't have to deal with messy paperwork like that $50 rebate that comes on the myTouch 4G. No, out the door, you pay the after rebate price, so that's pretty cool. But enough of that, let's get into the dogfight. HD7, myTouch 4G, it's about to be a dogfight. Okay, here they are, 2 of the best smartphones on T-Mobile, but they're really apples to oranges. One's Android, one's Windows Phone 7, but both are made by HTC. So we have the myTouch 4G made by HTC, available now for $199.99 or $450 on an Even More Plus plan if you're buying full retail. HD7 also available for $199, but if you're buying full retail, it goes up $50 to $499.99. So if you're buying, in a 2-year agreement, both are the same. If you're buying full retail, this one's $50 more than that one. Specs-wise, pretty similar for the most part, ironically in terms of specs. 1 gigahertz processor, 3.8-inch display on this one, 5 megapixel camera, Android 2.2 with HTC Sense user interface, but it's a myTouch version of HTC Sense user interface, so you notice a couple of little things like the dock here at the bottom is slightly different. You have themes on this device, which I have the downtown theme applied right now, but you can see boxes around the icons, little changes, not dramatic differences from the normal Sense, if you will, but definitely different. If you've used the myTouch 3G slide, very similar to what was on that, just a little bit of a newer version. On this front, 1 gigahertz processor as well, 4.3-inch display, so big display. Now, bigger doesn't necessarily mean better, but it does have a big honking display. 5 megapixel camera on the back, kickstand on the back for easy access to media while on the go, and Windows Phone 7. So, it's less of a hardware battle because both of these are pretty well spec'd, and it's more of an operating system battle. Android versus Windows Phone 7. Android's been out for some time, but 2.2 is pretty new, and an HTC Sense user interface is always fun to cover. On this hand, Windows Phone 7, pretty new, announced in earlier this year, released in November, still new, and should be interesting to pit against Android, the market leader at the moment, at least in the United States, for the most part, the market leader. And they've experienced exceptional growth over the course of the year. Who will win? Honestly, before we even get into the dogfight, I'll tell you, it would be challenging for me to decide between these two. They're both great devices, and it depends on what you use them for. If you came to me and said, I want a big screen, and I don't care about multitasking, HD7 all the way. You say, I need multitasking and I need Google support, Android, or the myTouch 4G, all the way. Now that said, that would be very much fun if I ended the dogfight like that. So we are going to compare them. We're going to see which ones perform better in their respective departments, browser, messaging, phone, etc., in the video. But one thing I will say out of it, just while I'm thinking about it, battery. Windows Phone 7, it's not necessarily a huge battery hog, but this only has a 1,230 milliamp battery versus 1,400 in the myTouch 4G. So even though this is more claims more resources, the battery's better than the myTouch 4G. I usually got about a day and a half with moderate use out of this. I'm always struggling to make it through the day with the HD7 with moderate use. So keep that in mind. That could be a make or break thing for you. But that said, let's get into the nitty gritty. So we'll start with the myTouch. And honestly, after reviewing a lot of Android devices this year, I'll be the first to tell you the myTouch 4G is one of my favorite Android devices on the market right now. It's very well spec'd. It's a good device. The build quality is fantastic. The metal battery door is awesome. And it's one of those devices, when I saw it on launch day, or when I got my review unit a few days before launch day, actually, I remember pulling it out of its pouch and thinking, this is a lot better in terms of build quality than I thought it was going to be. Much better on that front. Feels good. Has a nice premium feel to it. It makes you feel like it's worth $200. And, since you're paying $200, obviously, you should have a phone that makes you feel like it's worth it. But the metal accents they're a nice touch. The trackpad on the bottom, just the build quality in general, you can see, wait for it to focus in. You can see the trackpad and the buttons on the bottom, all very, emit or exude a premium feel. Volume rocker on the left, micro USB charging port, dock connectors for something in the future, and then on your right side, camera shortcut button, 3.5mm headphone jack on the top, and power button. So nice device. It feels good. No squeaking whatsoever in the hand. You know, it's one of my favorite Android devices. This, on the other hand, I love the build quality of the HD7. Also feels good. You know, it has these, still plastic, but it has these nice chrome accents. The kickstand is metal, and has a dual LED flash, 5-megapixel camera, nice little metal touches like HD7 here on the bottom, Windows Phone. So it looks good, and you can see it's nice and minimalistic. 3.5mm headphone jack on the bottom, along with your micro USB charging port. Nothing on the left side. Camera shortcut button and volume rocker on the right, and then your power button on the top. So you'll notice the myTouch 4G, 3.8-inch display, HD7 4.3-inch display. So in terms of size, that's what you're looking at. So you know the myTouch 4G is noticeably smaller than the HD7. But again, you know, the way this curves on the back, let's see if I can angle it where you can see it in the camera. The way this curves on the back and the overall aesthetic of this device really makes it feel less than it is, if that makes any sense. It doesn't feel like a 4.3-inch device. It's easy to hold, and it's not as blocky as something like the HD2 or some of the other 4.3-inch devices. The Evo, it's a little bit slimmer than the Evo 4G, but just loving, absolutely loving the design of this as well. So let's take a look at some of the specifics. You know, we'll start with messaging. For example, you'll see here, open up our respective messaging apps, and you'll see here, you know, both have threaded text messaging. The one thing I've been really pleased with on Windows Phone 7, the transition effects are absolutely fantastic. I mean, there's no lag whatsoever, and even when you have 10 or 20 message conversations going on, it's a constant, smooth, no lag whatsoever. Whereas it is a little bit more blocky with Android. There's no smooth transition effect there. I mean, it's kind of up, down. You know, there's no nice pretty graphics that go across the screen or anything like that as you scroll over. Whereas with this one, there is. You can see it's a very easy transition. But let's take a look at the keyboard. You know, with Android, you get the option of multiple keyboards. You know, just out of the box on the myTouch 4G, you get the HTC keyboard, you get swipe, and then you get something called drag and dictation, which honestly I didn't care for, but you can use the standard keyboard or you can tap to speak. But I just couldn't get the hang of it. Go back to input method, go to swipe. You can see that's on. Swipe's pre-installed as well. Hey, how are you? Or hey oot hartoy. Hey, how are you? Whereas on the Windows Phone 7 devices, it's a very standard Microsoft keyboard. So it, you know, the keys feel good. You know, on the 4.3-inch device, it's funny because I've used the LG Quantum, some of the smaller Windows Phone 7 devices, the LG Quantum, the Samsung Focus, which is a little bit smaller. And you know, for me, the keyboard, it's just it's nice on the HD7. You get any smaller than the HD7, and it's pretty hard to type on, at least for me. So, you know, we'll do. So you can see, you know, there's some mistakes that have been made, but we can go back up with Windows Phone 7, click on it, and instead of fur, we meant for. Instead of get, we meant hey. So in terms of autocorrection, you know, I don't feel like it's as good as Android when you're typing, but you can easily go back and correct the words. But again, you know, just I can't get over on Windows Phone 7 how smooth it is. I mean, there's no lag whatsoever, and the transitions actually kind of cover up what little lag there is. But you can see very easy to migrate between portrait and landscape, and that's what the landscape Windows Phone 7 keyboard looks like. So you get an idea there, but you're limited to the Windows Phone 7 keyboard. It's very good, don't get me wrong, but for the rare person that doesn't enjoy the Windows Phone 7 keyboard, you're kind of stuck there. Whereas with this, you have swipe, and then of course you have the standard HTC keyboard, or touch, well, they call it touch input on this, but it's HTC's standard Sense keyboard with pretty fantastic autocorrection. Go back and do Y, and you can see there. So I mean, it's fantastic, easy to use, even on a 3.8-inch display. And this is one of those things, you know, if this was a 3.8-inch Windows phone, the keyboard would be pretty hard to use. But that's testament to how good Android's keyboard is, even in smaller display areas. So on the keyboard front, you know, I have to give a narrow edge to the myTouch 4G. Don't get me wrong, I love the keyboard on the HD7, and I've gotten used to it. and it's very easy to use. But in terms of overall ease of use, the number of keyboard options available, and more, I have to give it to the myTouch 4G. So let's take a look at Gmail, you know, for example, as the mail app on both of these devices. Now, this is the same Gmail account, just running on one on Windows Phone 7, one on Android, so you can see the differences. But let's take a look at, for example, the Google Buzz email that I reference pretty regularly. On Android 2, this is running Android 2.2, so you'll notice the typical 2.2 things like the header stays at the top regardless of where I'm at in the email. So I know it's from Google Buzz the entire time I scroll up and scroll down. You have these nifty little features here where you can reply all, and forward from the top no matter where you're at in the email. Now, this is very simplistic, you know, for people that love simplicity, like the way the iPhone looks. You know, I find a lot of similarities surprisingly, between Windows Phone 7 and Apple, or iOS rather. So this is what Google Buzz, that same email looks like in Windows Phone 7. You can see the font to me is a little bit cleaner, it's larger, but there's no header that stays at the top while you scroll. So I mean, you know, that may frustrate you. You have to remember it's from Google Buzz and remember what email address it was sent to. But from the bottom, you can scroll from message to message, you can reply, you can throw it away, you can mark on red, or you can move it. So you have some options from the bottom. And again, you know, the transition effects. Just to show you an example, we'll do this one from the top just to give you an idea. These are the transition effect differences. You can see, I mean, very clean on the Windows Phone 7 front, where it's a little bit more blocky on Android, but you can see the differences. The differences there. Larger font, and let me pull up the Moto Blur one, for example, where it has the font that's scrolling off of the side of the page. You see how it cuts it off there. That's something that you see as a pretty common feature in Windows Phone 7 across the board. The font's cut off. You know, it's funny, when I saw it at CTIA CES earlier in the year, I thought I'm going to hate this when it comes out, this font rolling off the screen. It's pretty frustrating, but actually using it in everyday use, it's not at all. It's very functional, and it looks good to boot. It's this nice fluid user interface. You know, they describe it as Metro UI with the tiles and with the fonts. It's intended to look like subway tiles and keep everything organized within their tiles, whereas on this, you know, you have your typical widgets and your typical apps at the bottom and in the app drawer, etc. Now, the home screens themselves are very different here. You know, on this one, for example, you have 5 home screens out of the box with the option to make it 7 in the menu. Once you set it to 7, you have to do a system reset to take it back to 5, but I just have 5 right now. This has no home screen. It's one continual home screen. You can add as many tiles as you want to the screen, but it just scrolls up and down, and then to get over to your apps, you just either flick or tap the arrow button at the top. So, excuse me. So you either click it up at the top. So you have, you know, a couple different menu looks here. You know, you can change the color of these tiles, but you know, it's a very much a version 1 version of the software. I mean, you know, in little things like, for example, the Internet Explorer is a square tab, whereas this is a rectangular box. And you can't change that in the settings. You have to wait until, you know, version 2 or version 3, whenever they allow that in future versions of Windows Phone 7. So I can see functionality for something like messaging, where you have a rectangular square, and maybe it shows a preview of the messages or who you've gotten messages from over in the empty part of the rectangle. I know in the calendar, you know, if I had an appointment, it would show up right here. I can see that being functional in phone or people or Google Mail or messaging. And it's just not allowed yet. I mean, there's no way to dictate which one is going to be a square and which one's going to be a rectangle until you get it out on the main screen. It's already pinned to the start. I was going to see if I could do it again. But, you know, for example, pictures, rectangular as well. HTC Hub, whereas maps, it's square. So, you know, there's little customization options that you could do out of the box with Windows Phone 7, but if you're looking for the utmost customization, Android's your device, at least right now. You can change the colors of these boxes, for example. Let's go to settings. There are some things you can do. You can change the background from light to dark, and you can change, let's say, the accent color from brown to teal. And you can come back and you can see, you know, you can do little things like that, but no wallpaper in the background. The only time you see the wallpaper is when you are on the main screen, right when you power it up, or turn the power button on, rather. But no other customizations beyond that. Now, that said, I mean, just look at the fluidity of this device as opposed to something like Android. I mean, there's no lag whatsoever, and granted, it doesn't have multitasking. So it's a continuous trade-off of whether multitasking is more important to you, customization is more important to you, or simplicity, fluidity, you know, and less customization is more important.